This is our meeting of the AMATS Technical Advisory Committee. I know Craig is.
Hi. Sure am.
Oh yeah, actually, it's my roll call. I almost forgot. Almost forgot.
Here.
Ms. Morrison.
Here.
Mr. Wilbur.
Here.
Ms. Witt. Here. Mr. Weaver.
Here.
Ms. Monroe's here. Ms. Howe. Here. Mr. Carr.
Here.
We do have four. We do have a special guest with us here today. If any of you have attended our technical advisory committees in the past, we usually have a phone set up here on the corner, and we sometimes talk to it. And it's our FHWA, Chris Riesenberg is actually here with us today. So rather than the phone being sitting there, thank you for being with us, Chris.
Madam Chair.
Okay.
Make a complimentary introduction.
Of course.
Not only do we have that one FHWA rep sitting right next to him, Brian Betleon, who's with the Resource Center in Maryland.
Awesome.
And he came up today to give a planning performance measures talk this morning, and he'll be here tomorrow as well for an all-day training session.
Just a management process.
Just a management process. And coincidentally, 10 years ago when I first started this job, Dave Post and I went to a training on the introduction to metropolitan transportation planning in New York City, and Brian taught that course. So I started with him, and now I'm here with him again.
So
Yes.
Brian, we can blame.
I'm stalking him.
Periodically, prolonged stocks.
In addition, we also have down from Fairbanks today, who was attending today's course, and I think she'll be here tomorrow as well as my counterpart from Fairbanks, Donna Gardino, who is the FMAS coordinator. So hopefully she'll be soon, so you won't hire her instead of me. And I think that's it for your distinguished reps. Although, I don't know what Mike's title is exactly here, but I know he's with DOT headquarters planning. Program development. So Mike Figure is here as well. And since we're here, there's Todd Logan, who's with our like. Everyone, just introduce yourselves.
Welcome, everybody. Nice to see everyone. I unfortunately was not able to come today. We're hosting back-to-back meetings, but I will be there tomorrow. So participate in that. So please let the record show that Mr. Roboto and Mr. Weaver have also joined us. So we really have for I'm sorry. No, Mr. Anthony's here.
No, Mr. Weaver.
Mr. Weaver was. Oh, yeah, that's true.
And Mr. Morris.
And Mr. Morris. We're all here. We're still troublous.
Let's do something.
All right.
All of our AMATS meetings are public meetings. The public is invited to comment on items that we have before us. If we have a business item, we'll have a presentation by staff or consultants, and the committee will then be given a chance to comment on it. At that point, the public will then be given a chance to comment. There you go.
Thank you very much. So first item of business is the approval of the agenda. Move to approve.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Howe, seconded by Mr. Carr. Are there any opposed to approving the agenda? Hearing none, we are so moved. We don't have any minutes this time. I was going to ask, what's the status of the minutes? How many are we still behind?
No. I don't know what you have that sheet from.
No, it's all,
First computer is dying, so.
I can get it before.
I'll send one out.
I'll
to the
send it to
committee.
Yeah, you'll send us an update.
Know where we're at.
Heads up.
Thank you very much. So the first item of business, do we have a big printout?
Yes.
Do you want us to wait, or do you want?
No, we can do it now. I'll let you ground rules and stuff, and then I'll show you the map. My plan was to have it up on the board there, but our computer's not cooperating with us.
Okay, so we're going to
Today.
be discussing the AMATS boundary update.
All right, so we've had several meetings on this topic. As you know, we are updating our urbanized area boundary to reflect the census and whether there are any changes from that. We had the last meeting that we had I believe, if I remember correctly, we talked a little bit about some of the smoothing that we wanted to do. What we get I'm not an expert at this area. Joni, who we dropped off the map that had to leave. Is the one who prepared this. There are shape files and things, you take these creatures in there and then you say, here's what it equates to, and then we as an MPO are allowed to do some smoothing to say, well, we think this is, we'd like to change this a little bit, and as long as you have a good, valid reason for doing that, then that's okay. Two of the changes that we had was part of the boundary included what appeared to me to be water or mud, and so we smoothed that out. Part of the boundary included some portion of a park in Eagle River, and so we smoothed that out. That's what the census tracts showed us that we should include, but clearly, if it's a park and if it's water, it shouldn't be, so we smoothed that out. So I'm just gonna, I guess I'll have it right here. Can somebody help me hold that other side really quickly? Look, the tall guy, can't help. So.
That's why you invited me.
That's why I invited him. So basically, the main two areas that we smoothed out that I just mentioned was, there were some areas down here that were included that were, again, they were water, so we smoothed that out. That's what the shape file showed that we should include, but we smoothed that out. And then up here in Eagle River, this part of the park here in green was included, and so we took that out because it's a park, no one lives there, so you can't include that part. So, as we discussed before, this area in blue up here is part of the area that would be part of the urbanized area boundary. And then we talked about the discussion about the Elmendorf, how part of this was, or Jaeger, I should say, part of this was included, and there were some that were part of the old and some that were new, and we combined it to be whatever the whole outside boundary is. So the one point of discussion that we had at the last meeting was including all of J there inside the boundary. And this is what we think, staff thinks, is what you should have, is it would not be including all of J there, but including it as we defined here with the blue line. This, as far as we can tell and understand some discussions with Federal Highways, meets the intent of what we're supposed to be doing when creating our new urbanized area. So this before you, I had 4 different maps I was going to show you, and it would have been a lot easier to roll through them, but in this case, this would be our proposal for taking into account what you had suggested and then smoothing those main areas out. This would be our proposal for the new urbanized area boundary.
So the blue line, that gray area just above the red line there, that is still included?
Oh, yeah, this blue line, all of this area would be included in our urbanized area boundary down to here, and then this up here basically is most of the new stuff. Because we didn't have urbanized area boundary before. But the new census, those what the shape files suggest, that was what we should include.
In the old days, we used to have urban clusters, and they had to be connected somehow, Chris. So I guess that's been done away with, because those two aren't necessarily connected.
Yeah, they changed the rules a little bit on, they have jumps and leaps and things along those lines, that how you can connect different areas. And those are actually the terms used by the census, the jumps and the leaps. You can only have one leap. Brian, is this one big jump, or one, so many miles in between developable areas or urbanized clusters in order for them to be considered connected. And I think that's somebody probably taking notes on this.
We won't know.
Yeah. And so I don't know exactly how this distance works out here in this specific situation, but the rules did change with the census and how they connected the areas, but I'm assuming that that's why this is different.
Other questions from the committee? Are there any questions or comments? Modification to the urbanized Hearing none, it's back to us. And so the item we're looking for is for us to recommend to the policy committee approval of revised urbanized area boundary. Okay.
Madam Chair, I guess I would offer a motion to recommend approval of the preferred boundaries of AMATS to the AMATS PC.
Second. Moved by Mr. Carr, seconded by Ms. Howe. Are there any opposed to the motion?
No, just a question.
Yes, Mr. Weber.
Jerry, the hillside outside the center, on the hillside, that's not considered urbanized area, even in our planning documents, or it is?
There's a difference between planning and the census, but from your knowledge, or maybe you know, Craig, the hillside's not recommended.
It's not considered urbanized area.
Well, I think, Craig, have you looked at that particularly because, you know, it's kind of goes part density of why I question your group not being part of the urbanized boundary. Obviously, the hillside has less density, although they have urban amenities there with respect to road improvements. So, I'm not sure, did you look exactly to actually exclude hillside? I haven't had a conversation. Okay.
Did not look to exclude them, just the shape files, the census, this is how it came back as, and we didn't have a discussion about that. In terms of Girdwood, it's the, I don't know, I guess the term is contiguity. It's so far away, that's a bigger giant step or a leap and bound.
I think we're quite finished with because it should be a Birchwood is an urbanized boundary, which a significant portion of it is. There will be no differentiation between that area.
Well, my recollection is maybe Chris or Brian can help here. We get this information from the census. I mean, the census presents us based upon their analysis of what is considered an urbanized zone. And then we can go in and make adjustments to that. But if they don't have that density there, I don't know that we can make that giant leap to go out there and add it to it. We can make it part of an urbanized planning area if you want, because that's our choice. But as far as the definition that Bureau of Census is concerned, they don't meet it.
I'd be curious, did you correlate that to the census data that they, with respect to urbanization of what they determine urbanization, and what we're required to determine as urbanization for the boundaries of the BO? I don't see a lot of difference in density between Chugiak, Eagle River, Birchwood than the hillside. In a lot of the areas that we've included in Chugiak, Birchwood.
Just let me follow up. So I agree with Bruce. I mean, what the census figures out and how they determine whether or not the hillside looks like Chugiak is really not our call, and their logic is kind of beyond our control.
And I also agree with Jerry. I don't know why they did the differentiation. Why did they not include that?
But this blue line represents the 2010 census information. The whole purpose of this, bringing this to our attention, is to update the urbanized area as it relates to the census, but we are not changing our AMATS boundary area, are we?
That is correct.
Okay.
The boundaries as stays identical.
It's just the urbanized area within our AMATS plan.
Yeah, and that's just, I don't remember the exact website, but
Okay.
the website, you download those shape files, which come out of the census, and there it is. And if you want to do some smoothing like we did, which, you know, take out the park and other stuff, you have to have a good reason for doing that.
And our
I'm not saying the hillside's not a good reason, I'm happy to do that, just didn't come up.
Yeah, the only reason for my question, Madam Chair, was just from a planning perspective, and because our AMATS planning boundary is changing, and then the blue line's actually changing as a result of the 10 census, and that's what we're updating on our map.
Yes.
Okay.
And as we discussed previously, we were saying just because it's considered the urbanized area, that's not dictating whether things are developed as urban or rural.
That's right.
That's not
Okay.
something that's dictated by this.
That's true.
There isn't a conflict with that. That's still up to our zoning and our planning
Mr. Khan, Mr. Glover.
Okay.
So,
All right,
thank you.
so we have the motion, it's seconded. No question. Are there any opposed to the motion? Hearing none, we are so moved. Please forward a recommendation on the policy committee. Is there any other business at this time?
No, our other business item is on the Technical Advisory Committee, and Ms. Epstein, since she couldn't be here, asked that we postpone it for a month, so we'll bring that up again next month.
So we're moving on to the informational reports. And item 6A is the non-motorized transportation status update. Remember to introduce yourself for the record.
I'm Laura Skanke, the non-motorized transportation coordinator for the municipality, and I have a few things to tell you about this month. We have been working with the State of Alaska project manager on the bike lane projects. Remember, it got funded in December, and so far, that just in the last month, the project manager sent us a draft memorandum of agreement, so we kind of whacked through that, and now it's going around for signatures, and I believe it's in the municipal manager's office. We're also working with one of our project management consultants to go ahead and start estimating costs out, and after that, they'll probably go ahead and get a consultant on board, and then we can get started. We are planning to go to the pedestrian bicycle committee next week, so that'll be good to all three of us to just present to them and get their input from that. But you'll be seeing more of that project as it progresses. Second, this year we were very lucky. The health department paid to have us reprint the bike maps. And this version of the map, I should also mention that CRW again donated their time to make revisions on the map. We moved the construction cones around. They're logical, they're not just anywhere. And we added a couple bike shops, so that's kind of exciting. And adjusted a few routes that had been added, like Victory Road, things like that. The third thing, Bike to Work Day, and Ann is going to tell you more about that right after I'm done. But every year we count. The municipality has counters. Last year we were up to 14 stations, and I need volunteers still. I'm short 5 volunteers, so I don't know if anyone, Mr. Morris helps every year, thank you so much, and you help. You would like to help, I'll pass the schedule to you. So we usually work in 2 shifts, 6:30 to 7:45 a.m. and 7:45 to 9. And this year, the traffic department has also put a really nice sheet together, and they're going to start helping us crank things out of the numbers, so. Sorry?
What day is it?
May 17th, which is next Friday. I was trying to push DOT to man the booth at International and Jewel Lake. I was gonna.
It's coming together.
It is? Oh, great.
Right.
If you need a donation, I'd be
No,
happy
we
to make
already
a
got
personal
the
donation.
donation
Thank
for
you.
that.
That's
That's
great.
there.
So we'll just hook you up. Who's in charge, Jennifer?
Well, like, who's on first?
Brian Littman's from BCA is the main coordinator of that. I was just sort of intervening. So who should I have in contact?
Probably Linda Bustamante.
Okay, I will look her up, thanks. The final thing, which I saved till last, Ann Schlapie and I spent a month and a half putting together the renewal for our bicycle-friendly city. And as you know, we've been bronze for the last few years, and we just got word on Monday that we are now silver. So it's a really big deal. They've asked for a quote from the mayor, which we're trying to get out of them, and we're also trying to set up a celebration, and our idea was to get the assembly, and this group would be great, and even the policy committee on bikes at a location. We're thinking either the lagoon or Cutting Park and have a big party. So you may be hearing more from this. I'm working with the mayor's office and with Terry upstairs on that. So congratulations. Yeah. And I'd like to have Ann Schlapie go ahead. She's going to tell you what Bike to Work Day.
I had a presentation, but now I think I just have sock puppets. Because it's not functioning. Okay, I'll let that go. Bike to Work is an event initiated in, I think, like 1956 by the League of American Bicyclists. And so local celebration that I'm aware of began at the health department in our community health promotion group. And it was pretty informal. They emailed and said, if you're going to bike to work that day, let me know about it. And 167 people responded that year. So that was 2005. And as time went on, slowly, I began to support it with the air quality outreach funds, for like printing here and there and promoting to businesses and so on. But it has grown dramatically through the years. Our primary partners are BCA, the municipality, and the State of Alaska Community Obesity Prevention Group. And BCA does all sorts of things, but primarily we really depend on them to organize treat stations and work through their members. The state health provides T-shirts, which is even though it's $5,000, it doesn't sound like a huge chunk of change. It's a big deal because it's an incentive for teams to sign up. And so South Central and AMTHC, the whole Native Medical Complex over there, are really good partners. They receive actually some grant funds to promote that among their business, but then they're generous enough to open their doors all week, to have treat stations all week, and to have a bike blessing and a bike bash in the evening. So we really appreciate their efforts. They also have received awards from the league as bicycle-friendly businesses, and so that's a great help. A lot of momentum. The bike plan was 2010. We got bike-friendly community, that bronze award that Lori spoke of back then, and we've been trying to claw our way to the top ever since. We have what Bike to Work does generally is you'll recognize the air quality awareness program is in the SIP, but that whole campaign. We go to businesses and register teams from businesses and a commuter. Typically, there's a bike commuter business who will persuade his or her work associates to join the team, and then they have a contact who can hopefully teach them how to, what route to take, what to wear, how to go about it. There's advertising through the campaign, television, you might be hearing radio, Pandora online, and so on. And since we can keep it short, we can make it fairly intense, of a couple-week duration, and really be every week, as I've heard. And it gives a nice opportunity for training and outreach. So as we've gotten training from the league and teaching bike classes, I'm gesturing over to Lori over there, as league cycling instructors. There are a small group of us in town. We use this as a means to get out and do whatever teaching we can, either full-fledged classes or small seminars and so on, to groups in brown bags. So I've done a health fair talk, a safety carnival, transportation fair, UAA Development Day, a couple of presentations at BP, and we have a training at Lakewood Elementary next week. So we really use this as a way to try and get bike safety information out to the community. So we use to evaluate this, we judge based on, we count the number of meetings, the number of participants. Lori alluded to the count of bikes on Bike to Work Day. And then we also do an online survey, and that survey is pretty robust. We have over 950 people participate last year. So you're all data monitors, we're all data monitors, and we say more data is more better. And so we actually, it's the state of Alaska takes their does the data analysis with their PhD statistician. So we really work that over and get some good information. The observation last year, the count was 3,815. Some, of course, are counted multiple times as they travel toward downtown, but then, of course, some are not counted at all. So it's a relative number, but we compare the same sites to the same sites, even though Lori's expanded the number of sites per year. And so from the survey, some of the interesting things we have, One might think that the participants are largely young, but actually maybe about 10% are in their 60s, but the rest are fairly evenly broken up among the decades. The median age has been about 40, 41, so no spring chickens in this. The interesting thing with this, we asked about...
What are you saying?
We asked,
Well, the rest of us.
we asked about education last year. That was interesting. 77% had college degrees plus. So as I get these mails from these folks, they're like forensic post-operative hyperbaric questions, and I'm thinking, I don't know what that is. So a lot of smart cookies participate. What we really enjoyed, we know that surveys, that generally more females than males take surveys, and 52% of those that took the survey last year were female. But we use some of this in our application. We still believe that a large portion of women in town, or riders in town, are female. 2009, the statistic we look at is that, I think they say, 24% of trips taken by women. I think we do much better up here. Another thing that we've compared, 37 million people in California have 20 female league cycling instructors. And of course, in our application, we pointed out that we have 25%, and they're the most active of the group. So I think we do, like I said, quite well as far as that's concerned. What's that have to do with Bike to Work? Well, I think it does help. I think females tend to persuade other friends to participate in the team, and they give this as a reason why they ride and bike to work, to support their team. Men generally will invite only those that are slower than they are, so that kind of thins them out.
I think it's a great survey.
No, we're concerned about the race, ethnicity. We would ideally, what we see nationally is a lot of well-heeled people with the sports car in the garage, take to the bike, largely white. And to some degree, that's mirrored up here. We do have a lot of white individuals riding, but we are the American Indian Alaska Native group is fairly robust. It's just short of what the census finds, and so I think that's a result of our partners over there doing a good push. This morning, BCA put the map up of the treat station. It's done in Google Maps, and it was made in 2011. They first put it online, so they use the same map and they just rearrange the treat stations per year. The interesting thing on that map is the number of views between 2011 and this morning, and we haven't even started the 2013 season, is 47,000. So is there interest in Bike to Work? Yes, it seems that way. Other data we have includes, of course, the total miles, the origin, destination, zip code, the time to ride to work versus drive, what people find as obstacles and incentives. So that's all just kind of a brief description of what we do as far as Bike to Work is concerned. And if you are interested in any data, contact me after Bike to Work. Any questions?
Just a comment. So for the guys in the room, if you want to bike to work, you take the bus home, we'll help you out. Bike rides.
There are about, I think about 8% of individuals said they only rode one way. Yeah.
They ride downhill.
Yeah, that's
Thanks
Say
very
that
much.
depends. My ride home is downhill, but the wind sometimes blows so hard down the lake that you actually have to pedal going downhill. And that's sad to me. Thank you very much. I guess, are there any questions or comments from the public? Yes, sir.
My name is Robert Shipley. I'm a cyclist, and I just make a couple of comments and ask a question. Congratulations, Lori and Ms. Silver. You're on your good work. It's good. With regard to the new map, it's always good to see a new map, an updated map, because they get out of date when things change. And, it's also good for me at least my opinion, to see the informational inserts in the safety and the advisory etiquette recommendations, because while there are a lot of, there's a lot of cycle and vehicle conflicts in town that I observe. And a lot of it is ignorant or rude drivers, but there's also a lot of ignorant and rude cyclists. And that's one of our battles, is to get people to fight in compliance, because if I'm in compliance riding, some 14-year-old boy zips across the street or against the light and pisses off some drivers, and I'm the next biker that come along, I catch it, even though I'm innocent. And it's not just 14-year-old boy, over 21, over 50, well, you know, age is no excuse.
Yeah.
So those are my comments.
Spring chickens.
Again, oh, the question was, what is the specific, in regard to construction, this is the specific part of the coastal trail that is being done this summer?
There is a little note on Claremont that has a web link. They had dates in the paper, but construction is always changed, so it's only that to their web page.
And it's pretty much the full, I mean, it goes from, is it Earthquake Park? I mean, sections go almost as far out as Earthquake Park down. Yeah, down to the river. I mean, they're phasing it and they're gonna be doing it in pieces, but I'd say I'd recommend going to the website to keep on top of what the actual closures are going to be on the coastal trail. So,
Twitter.
anything else from the public this time? All right, then we're on to our next item, which is the performance-based planning and program update.
Turn the projector or
Yeah, I promise no death by PowerPoint, but I just wanted to share a few slides to sort of summarize the topic that we were talking about this morning. While folks are taking their adjusted seat here, again, my name is Brian Betleon, and I'm a member of the planning team at the Federal Highway Resource Center. So I bring you greetings from Baltimore, Maryland. The Resource Center, our major customers are our divisions and folks like Chris and our headquarters. We provide training and technical assistance services. So hot topics like performance-based planning and programming, we're out on the road these days with our aim to help our customers, which everybody in this room qualifies, to stay ahead of the game. So this morning we had a really good group of DOT folks and staff, and some consultant or two. Am I missing anybody? We talked for 3 hours on maybe what to expect and how to be proactive in thinking about performance-based planning and programming. So I'm just going to share just a couple slides very quickly here. I told Craig no more than 15 minutes. And then if there's any questions or discussion, be happy to take those questions as well. So moving ahead for progress, MAP 21, long-awaited Surface Transportation Bill reauthorization from last year set in place the procedures for transitioning from the transportation planning and programming process we've all known and loved for so many years, developing long-range plans and statewide and metropolitan transportation improvement programs. That process is still going to be there, but it's going to be performance-based. And it's going to ratchet up the accountability level for how planning organizations, DOTs, MPOs, and others spend federal dollars for transportation improvements. This is the process we talked about this morning. MAP 21 established 7 national goal areas of impact to transportation planning. Currently, the U.S. Department of Transportation, Federal Highway Administration, and Federal Transit Administration are developing the rulemaking. How to take Congress's intent and all that wonderful statutory language and put it into regulations to implement the law. Those measures are being developed internally at our headquarters office in D.C. We hope the rulemaking will be out by this fall. After that rulemaking is out, and there's a 90-day comment period, and the final rulemaking and rules are issued next year, then the state DOTs will establish performance targets for the 7 goal areas you'll see here in a moment. And then after the state DOTs take the lead in developing the targets to meet the national measures, the MPOs will, in collaboration and coordination with the state DOTs, will have some variation of those targets in their metropolitan long-range transportation plans. So what I just said is sort of nicely summarized in plain language on this slide. Transportation performance management. These are the 7 national goal areas that were stipulated in MAP 21. So each of those will be addressed in the proposed rulemaking, which will come out in phases later this year and maybe even extending into next year. So safety, infrastructure condition, state DOTs have already been doing a pretty good job of measuring number of fatalities and pavement condition and bridge sufficiency ratings and whatnot. I think you might agree that number 3, 4, 5, and 6 will be goal areas that are a little less established in planning process, at least from a national standpoint. So we'll be very interested to see what measures are set by the US DOT for congestion reduction, system reliability, freight movement, and environmental sustainability. So here's the timeline I was referring to. Federal Highways and FTA are in that develop performance measures phase at the moment. And when the rulemaking is completed, then state DOTs will have 12 months to establish appropriate targets to address the national performance measures. And then the MPOs will have 180 days after that 12-month period to adopt appropriate targets into their long-range transportation plans and improvement programs. Okay, so here's the rulemaking process and the responsibilities from the modal administrations within the US DOT. I don't think all these bullets are super important for this quick summary. CMAQ program, Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program, has been very popular as far as money to be used for projects that have an air quality benefit. That's going to be performance-based as we move forward, so that to heighten the certainty that those dollars will be used for projects that actually do have an air quality benefit. And the HSIP acronym is the Highway Safety Improvement Program, the Strategic Safety Program as well. Strategic Highway Safety Program developed by the state DOT will certainly set a good basis for the safety performance measure and targets. I don't think we need to talk about that. I wanted to mention targets specifically because I think that is an area where the MPO staffs working with the DOTs can begin to get a head start on thinking about what targets would be appropriate for some of the potential measures. Remember the 7 national goal areas. We might have an idea what some measures are now. You know, we talked this morning, Alaska DOT has performance measures in their long-range transportation plan. You have your DOT dashboard. They just don't have targets yet. The same with MPO, the AMATS long-range plan has performance measures. They just don't have targets. So I think getting that discussion started now and using the staff as a resource and with folks at the Federal Highway Resource Center helping our divisions, we can begin to stimulate those conversations so we're not all procrastinating till the 11th hour when the measures come out and everybody's scrambling to meet some of those time frames that were on that page. So transit targets, highway targets, again, will be initiated by the state, and the MPOs will respond in kind with consistent and appropriate targets within their planning and programming documents as well. Public involvement. Put a plug in for public involvement this morning as the DOTs and the MPOs are talking about measures and targets. What a great opportunity to bring the stakeholders into the process. What matters to the public, what's important to them, and use that information in coming up with the appropriate response to the federal rulemaking. So this performance-based planning and programming process, goals and objectives, performance measures, targets embedded in those measures, are all part of the long-range planning process that we have sort of in plain language there on the left side of the screen. Now, the programming process, the development of the statewide transportation improvement program and the metropolitan TIP, that's your priority projects, right? So I think the intent of Congress was that with performance measures, those projects that meet the national measures and move your dial towards achieving your targets for those measures are the projects that should get programmed and prioritized in the region. And so the programming piece and the investment plan, matching monies with what investments and improvements would be important here in the state of Alaska will be an important component of this whole process. And then, of course, there's the reporting and the monitoring piece. We'll be reporting back to USDOT on the metropolitan and statewide performance of the transportation system, and that will be most likely on an annual basis. And I wish we knew what the penalty, if I could use that word, maybe it's too strong, but if a state's not meeting their targets, there might need to be some actions taken to prompt them to improve performance in certain areas. So we'll just have to see what the rulemaking comes out with in that respect. So I think this may be the last one I'll mention, and I want to refer to the flip chart, and then we'll just leave it for questions and discussion. This diagram attempts to take this performance-based planning and programming process on the right-hand side of the screen in purple and equate it to the existing planning process that's federally mandated that are on in green on the left side of the screen. So the intent and the message of this slide is performance measures. This performance-based planning process is not a new standalone process. It's just components of that process will be embedded into the existing transportation planning process. So performance measures become part of establishing a vision, goals, and objectives for implementing a long-range plan or a transportation improvement program. The targets become part of the laser going here, the alternate improvement strategies, and evaluation of strategies. And we're suggesting that it's probably okay at the beginning of your process and your plan update to think about aspirational targets. 0 fatalities on the highways. Sounds wonderful, but is it realistic? We have to think about, looking at data and trends to see how can we take an aspirational target at this very long-range planning process and through some analysis and evaluation, bring it down to realistic targets that can be embedded into the long-range transportation plans and also impact the projects that are selected for implementation in the programming documents. And in support, there's all these data, this data collection, that's a huge piece. We talked about that this morning. If I can reference the flip chart. The data needs, I think, is a topic that can be discussed, certainly beginning now, if it hasn't already. Think strategically about the data that's going to be needed or possibly needed to react to the national measures. I think once we know what they are this fall, we'll have a better indication of data, but you need to think more than 1 year at a time. We'll be on a reporting cycle annually, as I mentioned, and the first report will be due back to USDOT in 5 years after we get this process fully implemented. We talked this morning about early collaboration. Okay, this whole business of target setting is huge, and it's really going to change how we've accounted for projects moving from the long-range plan into the programming documents, and ratchets up the accountability. We have limited investment monies, but we have tons of needs. And so moving the dial and achieving the targets and the various performance measures will have to be a very important priority. So the DOTs, talking with the MPOs, the local jurisdictions, the feds, we're all sort of in this together. We have performance measures within federal highways that we need to account for on the national level as well. So that discussion can occur, and I would hope maybe having performance-based planning and programming on your TAC agenda today is just the start of some periodic discussions on some of the elements that we talked about this morning related to PBPP. So that discussion can keep flowing over the next year or two. And then last but not least, obviously we're monitoring the developments in the rulemaking so that when we get the indication of what those national measures may be related to the 7 goal areas that we saw on that earlier slide, that a lot of the legwork has been set in place related to data needs and who needs to be at the table in discussing what is an appropriate target statewide, and then for Anchorage, for Fairbanks. The collaboration and the coordination piece are so important. So I guess I'm sort of like a prophet up here a little bit. The Resource Center, we've been going around to the various states just making sure that the handwriting on the wall is clear and intelligible, and that we get these conversations started now. So with that, I'll entertain any questions or discussion that anybody may have on this performance-based planning and programming future that we're all anxiously full of excitement awaiting, right? Come on, everybody, this is great. I saw a thumbs up in the back there. Yes, sir.
If a person has an interest, what would you suggest be a means for staying in touch with what is being discussed in your office?
Well, I would say one way to stay in touch would be through our website, the Resource Center. We have quite a bit of information related to performance-based planning on our website. Sort of make sure our divisions are aware of new materials that are going up there. There's the information on the headquarters website in Washington. These few slides that you just saw in the last 10 minutes are part of a one-day training course we're putting together on this topic. So there will be a lot of additional resources coming out through the rest of this year related to training and technical assistance. And so we have a lot of webinars internally, don't we, Chris? More than, we could sit in webinars all day if we wanted to, probably.
Some days I do.
Sure. And these topics have been a big part of this recently. We have this planning piece we're talking about today, the planning and programming, but the Transportation Performance Management Office is also out there talking about managing all these measures and how they relate to each other with the DOTs and the MPOs and the different program areas. And so performance management is another topic that's you'll probably be hearing more about as well.
And Ken, I probably bother the planning folks and the MPO folks with emails more than they would want to see about new stuff coming out, and this is one that's on my radar, that it's part of, tag it, send it out if there's examples about other states and other MPOs do, I hit the planning post with those, and I can add you to the list if you would like, if you want something specific with performance-based planning and programming. But there's a lot of information out there. It's a lot of it is there's a lot of people, a lot of states and MPOs moving forward and just kind of doing what they think is going to come out with those national measures and already get a jump start on it. And so there's a lot of pioneers, a lot of states that are already doing a lot of good things. I know DOT's had Missouri folks up to talk with them, and Minnesota does good things, and so there's a lot of good examples out there. These states, and there's a lot of good MPOs with examples on that do pretty good performance-based planning. Not a lot targets, but there are some good examples of targets out there.
I think sharing that noteworthy practice examples is very important as well. We're trying to get a number of those on our website. And you know, it's not just the feds that are talking about this, obviously. The Transportation Research Board, TRB, and AASHTO, American Association of State and Highway Transportation Officials, are on board with this as well. And so, you know, it really is an effort at the federal, the state, and the local level, and with these different organizations backing it as well. Vivian?
Brian, could you please show them your slide with an example of a few targets that you showed us this morning?
Wasn't that one? Was it this one? Maybe.
Well,
Or the
it was
specific
previously.
target one.
A specific target. It was previous to.
The color one.
Yeah.
Did I pass it? These people know more about my slides than I do. Where was it?
We were paying attention to this one. Towards the beginning more.
Keep going.
Keep going. There.
This example. Okay, here's an overview practice. This is Genesee Transportation Council's Rochester, New York. I think this might be the one, because I'll tell you, this is actually maybe something the Anchorage staff would want to think about, because they already have goals and objectives identified in the transportation plan. We talked about those this morning. Now, what we need to do in this performance measure climate is take our old objective statements, which would have stopped with reduce the average travel time on index on the highway system, maybe would have been the statement in the good old days. Now it needs to have a target. We're going to reduce the average travel time index by what percent and by what year. And so the expectation will be that each national performance measure will have objectives supporting these goal statements that are this specific. Now that was their aspirational target, their realistic target based on looking at data and collaborating with their partners and establishing a benchmark was what we see here in blue, that the average travel time index on principal arterials does not increase by more than 5% by 2020. So they made it a little more specific. How do we reach this target? Well, maybe we think about implementing active signal management on all expressway ramps by 2015. That could be an action, that could be in the DOT as a sponsoring agency. And there would be supporting measures as well to look at change in average travel time, maybe an activity measure looking at percent of expressway ramps served by these active signal management systems. So thinking about performance measures in this context, goals, objectives, actions, and then the actual outcome or activity-based measures that would be part of reaching the target, could be a good exercise to think of in terms of the measures already in the MTP and the statewide long-range plan. And we actually had folks take a safety measure, just reducing traffic fatalities this morning, and talk about how they could make that a target, embed a target into that measure. So I think we just are in this phase where it's we need to be prepared and not sit around and wait necessarily for the measures, but be prepared for them when they come out. Yes.
I guess there's a certain amount of data that we already collect. We have certain, as far as safety and congestions, we have certain measures, but there's things, I guess, that we're not measuring now. I mean, and I'm having a hard time, I guess, developing how we can develop these targets when we don't know where we're shooting at yet. I mean, once we get this information, I know we've been meeting and discussing and talking about, I was looking for Teresa, she's on the other side of me. We've been meeting and discussing and talking about that, we can't just have goals, we need to have these measurable goals and how we're going to measure these things and whether or not we have the resources, the staff, the ability to be able to do that. And until you kind of have that background, and have, to get to kind of know where you are, you don't know where you're shooting at. You're kind of have this blind, and I guess, is there going to be any guidance on that? To help us develop some of these, because unless it's something that we're not currently measuring, we don't really have an estimate of where we need to be going.
Yeah, I would certainly hope the answer will be yes, that there is some guidance on by both Federal Highways and FTA. There will be some additional training materials. We have a contractor working on some additional training materials on this topic that will relate to the data, because that is a huge piece of this, and you sort of have to establish where are we now and sort of what is our baseline to know how to set your target.
Yeah.
So that's an excellent point that you're raising. Like you said, the safety and the infrastructure condition are the easy ones.
Yeah.
The two tough ones are going to be system reliability, which infers that you're going to have to be collecting some travel time data on a fairly cyclical basis, probably real-time travel data. And that congestion reduction one, but we're going to talk more about congestion reduction tomorrow with the congestion management process training, because that's one component of the planning process that can support achieving whatever measures would be mandated for that congestion reduction goal. Data really needs to be thought of strategically. What you guys are collecting now, how often, on what facilities, and how many years in the future you can collect that to facilitate annual reporting on these measures. So,
And one thing we discussed this morning, we're going to have those 5 or 6 national measures. I should know by heart how many, but that's going to be like the baseline. Beyond that will be the ones that the MPO and Anchorage think are important. And if you don't have data for it, is it really important? That's something you'll have to balance, and what is the cost of getting that data in order to measure it, set that as a goal. I guess federal-wise, we're saying those, top five are what we say is important, and likely you already freight movements. That's always been a planning factor in economic vitality. So, but you may not have hard data on it. That's one we have national data on. But those anything beyond those, you have to think hard if it's worthwhile to be a goal, and do you want to measure it, and do you want to take the time and pay the money to collect that data. It's hard to set, you can't really set a goal without having some data baseline.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge, definitely.
That's true. If it was a priority for us previously, and we have some sort of measure that we've been doing, maybe it doesn't exactly match. And if we could, try to better look at that data in order to refine it, see how we're doing, and kind of make it work
Refinement,
for us. Yeah.
exactly. So, yes.
I think I heard you say early in the presentation that when the rulemaking occurs, they're contemplating maybe having some consequences to not meeting a target that might be and I'm just wondering what form that might be. Or is there any sense about where that would be?
That question was asked this morning, and my response, Brian didn't want to venture there, I ventured there. You'd probably be seeing me more often. We'll probably be asking questions on why you're doing what you're doing, and things along the lines of why did you pick this project potentially when something else might reach the goal? Why are you balancing? So I guess the pain in the butt of having federal people looking more closely at what you're doing, I don't think there's going to be punitive type stuff in there. I think there may be flexibilities if you start achieving, potentially using your money elsewhere and things along those lines. I don't know that they're going to go to punitive, but that's a guess. Congress didn't lay out anything in there that we could see, so yeah.
And I think Federal Highway, we want the states and the MPOs to succeed in this. So we want to work with you to help you meet your targets. And so just maybe it's discussing, why aren't you meeting your target? What is it in the projects you're selecting for programming? Or, trying to find some answers to not meeting a target, or maybe an improvement plan or something like that. We'll just have to wait and see. But
I think there's nothing laid out in the rules really besides the certification process. That's our look into your planning process and giving judgment, potential corrective actions on, like I say, an action plan on dealing with it. And there could be a number of places where the process kind of goes off track a little bit. I mean, it's complicated, the planning process through development, through design, through implementation. I mean, it could be anywhere in there that takes you off from achieving that target.
It does look like it's a shift towards the more urbanized areas as opposed to using these resources outside the urbanized areas. Looking at the goals.
The safety national measures all public roads. Most of the other ones are NHS centric, and most of the NHS is in the urbanized areas. You have long stretches of it in Alaska and the rural areas, but there's more prairie, I guess, in the urbanized area. And I think Congress did that on purpose. Lack of money, so they directed more of the money toward the NHS. And I think they're putting more of the onus on the state or cities to potentially find more money to cover that shortfall. That's my perspective on it. I don't think that's official. I won't speak for the Transportation Secretary or Congress.
Why not, Chris? Take a risk. Okay. Any additional questions? As you may have questions or have some additional information needs, let Chris know. At the Resource Center, we have 11 different teams: planning, environment. We have bridge folks, pavement folks that can get down into the weeds on some of these. So Chris will convey any needs, and we'll be on the phone with him. So, yeah, Donna?
Aren't all the bridge evaluation criteria changing from the process that we used in the past?
Bridge
Well, this is changing.
I
It's
read
going to
some-
an elemental. there's gonna be 23 elements that are gonna be collected in the Pontus database, so that will be changing somewhat. I'm not sure exactly how yet.
Yeah, that's a good reminder. I think the states have more of a more in-depth criteria and performance measures and things like that for the bridge inspection program. And they have to go through, I don't know, is it 27 criteria or something? It's a more data-driven, more in-depth process than you had to do in the past. I think the rules were always there, but now they're attaching performance measures to all these things. And so yes, I think that's changing Pontus and other things along those lines.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to our session tomorrow, talking about the congestion management process as it relates to the work that the MPO does here in Anchorage. So onward and upward, everybody. Cheerleader here.
I saw you on
Sorry.
your face.
Too bad he's on my table because he's seasoned.
The last item, are there any other community comments for the order?
I included in your packet an updated schedule for the TIP. Mark and I got together and updated that with the actual information. So we still have to have it approved by October 2014. And at the bottom, you'll see the VC meeting June 26th. For scheduling that. We have still a little bit of wiggle room, a little less than we have, but there it is. It's just giving you an updated schedule.
I think having 4 months is a little longer is a good thing. I know. Are there any other comments?
I was just going to let the group know the Alaska State Rail Plan, which is being produced by the state DOT headquarters, will have 2 public meetings. One will be up here in May 29th for those who live closer to Wasilla. It'll be at the Menard Sports Complex. And then there'll be one here at the Lusac Library on June 4th. The state rail plan was mandated by the 2008 PREA Passenger Rail Investment and Something Act. And what it basically requires is that states, in order to be eligible for a number of federal grant programs, they have to have a state rail plan. The state rail plan for Alaska was last fully done in 1985 with a very small update for the Whittier Tunnel in 1992. So it's basically 25, 26 years old. DOT is responsible for that. This is not an Alaska Railroad plan. It is a state rail plan. And if you're interested in that, I suggest that you go to it and find out what they're doing. And then come back and tell Brian and I.
Can be added to their mailing list.
Yes.
They do have a website, you can be added to the mailing list, and they periodically send updates. I'm on that, so.
Yeah, from a little less cynical viewpoint, part of it is passenger rail investment. They're very interested in what communities are going to be doing as far as passenger rail. So as we all know, we have in our long-range plan here for the MTP commuter rail at some point in time. It may have to happen sooner than later. So.
Mr. Wilker?
On committee comments, the Public Transportation Department's going to have two open house style public meetings on the 29th and 30th of May. We are going to be looking at doing some scheduling changes that we'll implement in August. So we'll be going to community councils meetings. I think we're at LUSAC and most in City Hall. So if you're interested, let me know. Keep an eye on the website. We'll get Craig connected as well. And then I'm headed out to Eagle River at 4 o'clock for a joint meeting with the Matsu Transportation Committee. We're like transit needs.
Great. Any other committee comments? So our policy committee meeting will meet 2 weeks from today, May 23rd. And our next, that we will be here next month on June 13th. And the last item is if there's any other informational reports.
Let me add 2 other AMATS-related committee meetings. So
Okay.
next Wednesday, the 15th, if you need a large dose of AMATS, we have our Freight Advisory Committee, which meets at 3:30. It's in this room right here, 3:30. Or 170, okay, so fishbowl down the hall there. So 3:30 there, and then the Bike and Ped Committee will meet at 6:30 at the Assembly Conference Room in City Hall. So both of those on the 15th. You can go to both of those and see both myself and Bart for lots of extra hours.
Just said bicycle at 6:30 in the
6:30.
assembly conference room.
Yeah, first floor of City Hall.
Okay. And if are there any other informational reports?
Jamie Kenworthy, can I give you 5 slides in 5 minutes?
Can you?
Well, the question no one's asked me to answer is, what are the lessons of the Kabata audit for the AMATS Technical Committee? In August of 2011, you gave me 30 minutes to sort of outline the major number differences between the Kabata numbers and the AMATS numbers. And one of those issues was, I raised, how can you get 4 lanes of traffic across a 2-lane bridge, since the revenue from 4 lanes was included after 2026, it was out to 40,000 trips, and we never included the cost of a 2-lane bridge. That issue was ignored for 20 months, basically. In that December on 11, John Spring gave you, I think, a good briefing on the data. And there's a jump drive, Craig, if you can put it in there again. Not maybe other people don't want to see it. I just got it. John Spring gave you a good briefing on what was the difference between the Kabata numbers on population and household and traffic and the AMATS numbers. And it wasn't until last month, on April 6th, when the audit was released, that basically the first unit of government paid attention to the 4-lane, 2-lane problem. And they had basically made Kabata come up with a new budget that they had dated from December 12, that basically jumped the cost of the bridge from $1 billion to $1.6 billion. The number in the MTP is about a little over $700 million. So I know usually the most insincere words that people say to you in life, or at least I've heard them, is, I hate to say I told you so. Here are the problems where I think you're now at. First of all, because you called both sets of numbers, both the Kabata numbers and your numbers, potentially reasonable with MTP, sort of issues were ducked. And in effect, the bridge was sort of outside the MTP in terms of budget. And so now there are no accepted regional numbers, not within, I thought you did a great job on the MTP until you got to the bridge, but there's no accepted regional numbers between the borough and us. And I think your budget is out of date. And here's what I really wanted to tell you. Given all these meetings, I think it should be sort of communicated to you the absolute level of irritation of assembly members and legislators that they were drawn into a planning dispute. In effect, there were people walking into caucus with that 100-page Maynard report that detailed the 118% overestimation of toll revenues from National Transportation Research data. There were assembly members looking at TAS maps because they were trying to understand who to believe. And they're trying to figure out what is the cost of this bridge. And if there wasn't any agreed upon numbers on what the population or traffic was, they had to figure that out themselves. In effect, they were trying to figure out technical work to answer a policy issue first. So there was, because there are no agreed upon numbers, there was a lot more consternation about whether people had gotten out of role. Were you looking over your shoulders at what projects the politicians supported? And they were having to get to be doing very one-on-one planning. So there's continued confusion in the numbers, in my opinion. Cabada has announced that they will do new numbers, and they will have them, quote, peer reviewed before the legislative session. But since the chair describes the Gooseberry Road, Point McKenzie, Fairview area as the 4th largest city in Alaska in the future, I would describe their attitude as unreconstructed in terms of the different growth forecasts. Right now, HDR, as everyone knows, is doing the Wasilla bypass. When I look at the audit, the numbers that the MATSU has for the area and the numbers you have in the MTP are very close. It's no surprise because they're both using the ICER data you depended for the MTP, and they've got the same traffic model, they're just updating it. And the FHWA is going to have to redo the cost of the bridge this summer. So these separate planning efforts are going on right now. Now, I just didn't show up to crab at you. Here are my unsolicited solutions. The first is you start now on revising your 2035 numbers, and you commit. Oh, thanks, Greg. You commit now to working with the Department of Labor and ICER and the school district and the MATSU Borough and Cabada on a single set of TAS data. I just want to go back to a point. You don't have to change the slide, but basically, here are some of the fundamental planning issues that they were debating in the legislature. Are there 4,000 jobs at Point McKenzie in 2035, or are there 14,000 jobs? There were long, confusing testimony on what the different population estimates were of the MATSU. The TAS file that we finally got out of Wilbur Smith, when you add it up, was 191,000. But of course, it left out part of the Bureau when you corrected for what was outside the regional area. It was 200,000. So there was a 200,000 number that you had. And there was the 160,000 number that basically Scott Goldsmith and the Department of Labor were off by about 1,000. So you had 160 versus 2,000, 4,000 job, Point McKenzie, 14,000. You can see why people were confused. And whether they voted for the state guarantee or against the state guarantee, they were all irritated. So I think it's sort of getting back to solutions. I think I think the goal is to have by the end of the year a good TAS map that's publicly available. John Spring's briefing of you on the maps that he showed you, that's not. I couldn't find that in the minutes. The maps are not publicly available. I think as a public agency committed to a public discussion of planning issues, it should all be out there. So I think by the end of the year, you should have a TAS map that you're committed to. You can't guarantee that the MATSU Borough and Cabada will go along with your TAS map. But I think what the politicians expect is you have one. You have it, it's accessible, and people can click on it. And we put up on our website the Wilbur Smith one. People could click on it, see what the population estimate was, according to Wilbur Smith and Cabada, for each, and what number of jobs were there. So they could get a sense of whether they were for or against it. The politicians are looking at that. That should come from AMATS. It should start here. So I think you need to revise the TAS map and have the goal of having it all publicly accessible. And you're committed to it. That's what you think is reasonable. I don't think you can have huge bounds of reasonable. And you're glad I'm on the last slide. I think that gets everyone back to role. I mean, I think your role, you're the technical committee. Because you didn't commit to a particular technical set of data on the bridge, there was a lot of time spent different versions of work done that I think should have started here. And I think your goal is, to be as transparent on the traffic and the population and the household numbers as you are for most of Anchorage inside. Got the bridge passed. But I think that would get you back to functioning as the MPO, because inside, in my mind, I'm not here saying before the bridge wins the bridge. I'm saying you're the best place to do the homework. You're the MPO. And I think that would sort of get everything back on track. And then the policymakers will be making their decisions, but they'll be better grounded and less irritated than they make it, in my humble opinion. Did I do that in 5 minutes? Close.
Questions, comments from the committee?
I could comment that for probably $1 billion, I could build you a rail bridge that would have highway on it afterwards I can guarantee you how many trains and people I can put over. And
Well,
connect this side
yeah.
of the rail with the other side of the rail. One of the things that came out at the 11th hour, although it was first discussed here, is why should you, and it was right in the financial plan that no one wanted to pay attention to until some legislators, and I just briefed some of those aides, I never talked to Representative Costello. Why should the state be guaranteeing a contract in a P3 partnership that by Cabada's numbers was 12% annual ROI a year? Mine were 10, actually, it was the one thing they thought they underestimated their cost. When the state can bond for less than 4, the difference was $600 million. And people on April 6th started to think about that issue. So it's really, in my mind, I still think my number for the bridge is 2.4. I'm staying with it. Cabada told me it was free because it paid back the $150 million. Then it was $1 billion during the legislature, although they already showed the auditor had to put 4 lanes in and went to 1.6. So they're moving. It's not at 2.4 yet, and that's with the state bonding directly.
Well, when all said and done, we'll see if you get to say, I told you so.
Well, I think that if you read the audit, I think the auditor looked at those numbers for the Mat-Su population, and I think I think he came down on the Goldsmith-Kenworthy side. He didn't come down on the Cabada side. I think that's in the record. Now, Cabada is now saying, oh, well, we have a macro view, and they just took a micro group. So I'm not sure that planning dispute is over, but they had to hire someone from Phoenix, Arizona, who was a well-respected traffic consultant, to do stuff that I think you people knew in your bones from the start.
Is that audit available publicly now?
The audit is, the audit was available on April 6th. And it's on our Connect Bridge website, but it's in the message I tried to send. I think I had but you can just click on the message I sent, and you can read it. It's good. It's a good read. They picked up some things I had missed, but when I did my briefing, it said there will be twice the share of commuters. But this is Goldsmith data between Anchorage and Mat-Su, not number, but share. It was just implausible. They picked up the same thing. They picked up 2 things Scott and I did not pick up, which is they picked up there was a different breakdown between truck and car traffic, and they picked up the fact that basically it was implausible that they would get half of Mat-Su Anchorage traffic in 2035. Because they had to move. They had to move, and this was right there in the TAS data. In order to get to their population number of 200,000, they had to show all growth in the borough of Point McKenzie. Basically negligible growth in Palmer and Wasilla. It's just not plausible. And that's technical work. That's work that should happen here among the technical people, and it should not be happening at caucuses on July 6th, 3 days short of adjournment.
I think we're moving towards that, though. We have the policies and procedures out that basically make that process transparent. Requires us to publish the TAZ map that we're using as the assumptions we're going to use. And I think we're moving that's out for public comment now. So
you think that before the next session of legislature, there will be a TAS map that you have worked with Mat-Su and Anchorage on, and you will show what your numbers are, and you will be able to show the differences, and it will all be publicly available?
If I remember right, I think it says by June of next year. I think that's
June of next year. Well, there'll be bridge decisions that are up, for billions of dollars on the bypass and the bridge before that. I think, you could do this.
We can do it sooner than...
You could do this. You have the TAS map, you have your existing traffic data, and you could decide, since Cabada's going to go out and get a different set of numbers, you could decide it's your job. If they're promising new numbers by December and they don't even have those numbers, and you already have the ICER numbers from the demographic data, you can get Scott to do any modifications. I think HDR is doing that right now for the bypass.
Yes.
Is that right, Jennifer?
Right, and actually, just for clarification, one of the things that during our NTP update, the reason that we did not want to start running the model with and without tolls, for example, the fact that while we had done the model that had been developed for highway to highway and that had been used initially for the Connect Bridge environmental document had not been updated on the Mat-Su side. And so There were a lot of things that we found that have since developed over there, such as the prism that may not have been accurately reflected. We recognize as AMATS that we don't have any control over the update of the model on the other side of the bridge, and so we had to find a way to make it work. Since then, you're talking about the two sets of TAZs, one for the Madison Borough, one for Anchorage. The model that's been, you mentioned it's HDR's, is doing the work, but it's on behalf of DOT and the Madison Borough. And so that model actually uses it, and actually has all of Anchorage's data. They've just updated all of the Matsu stuff. And so if this body is interested at such time as that is ready for use, and I could certainly be presented. Yeah, but no, it's very.
Will you be modeling a toll bridge? Because that was another complaint. It wasn't realistic to model an untolled bridge, because we all know what tolls do to traffic.
Yeah, just keep in mind that the model was developed primarily to model alternatives for the Westfield bypass. It's also robust enough to be used for the long-range plan update for the borough, and it has the based on, and it is consistent with the disaggregation of employment and housing that was identified in the EIS for Cabada. So it feels a pretty accurate tool. It was not the intent, although modeling with and without a bridge does help define a travel shed and has an impact on Parks Highway, which is what we're primarily interested in.
So last question. So this work could be done just sitting down with HDR, because that's the basis of the Matsu model, and your model, because they're very slight differences. I think they're just doing those updates. And this committee could have a task map by the end of the year of basically what you find reasonable. And that could be public accessible by December. Because that would be helpful.
I'm looking for Teresa because of the modeling stuff. I think that's something that the staff, if the committee wants, could be looked into. Because it is, you're right, it is available. We don't have it posted on the AMATS website at this point. That is your point, right?
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Kenworthy? Please let the record show that Mr. Hanson and Mr. Mobley have your part, just for short. And then we have one other informational presentation. Please
Chair,
state your name.
members of the board, if you would. I probably have about 15 minutes and then questions.
Can you state your name for the record, please?
Oh, of course. My name is Chensmo Walker. I'm here today with the International Institute of Sustainable Transportation. The Institute is a partnership of the US DOT, the Swedish DOT, and a number of other collaborative nonprofits in primarily Sweden and the United States. I really want to thank Mr. Betlian. I think that although roads and highways, I think that this automated networks really have a lot in common. I hope to piggyback on a lot of what you said. And also with Anchorage developing and Alaska developing a regional or a comprehensive rail plan, and hearing that that hasn't been updated for a number of years. This is technically a rail-based technology at this point. I would also like to introduce Ryan Kennedy. He's a colleague of mine locally. I live in St. Paul, Minnesota. So of course we have a goal standard for our bikes in Minneapolis. I like my bike. So let's see how this clicker works. I'm going to talk about the future of sustainable transportation, automated mobility, robocars, personal rapid transit, ATN, etc. A little bit about me. I do have a Bachelor of Science degree in Urban Studies. I serve as chair of a national citizens group for personal rapid transit. I am the secretary of the Advanced Transit Association, which those two groups are both automated technology based. I do serve two local positions in what we call traditional transit. I think I'm going to start out with a video. I don't know how the audio will work, but it's much easier to describe this technology in a video. What do you think? I bet it's not loaded. Yeah, just can't find bear with me for 1 second while I try to make this work? I apologize. I thought that I had this loaded from my flash drive.
It's quieter. It's never quiet, but it's quieter.
It's not gonna work. So that's really too bad because that explains exactly what I was gonna talk about. So the idea, the concept, the reality of automated transit networks, it's also known as personal rapid transit, group rapid transit, or pod cars. Is anyone familiar with the concept? Yeah, right. And so the system characteristics, I had a video that just showed a video of what this looked like, much easier to visualize than a list. It's an elevated or at-grade track that houses the vehicle, and this track is grade separated. It's also an exclusive track for use by the pod cars. There are small vehicles, makes it personal, and this helps in a number of different ideas of how PRT is most successful. But it takes the cab of your car and turns it into a pod with the engine housed either in the vehicle or in the track. Robotic computer-controlled vehicles. Google was the first to come publicly with robotic autonomous road vehicles. I had a chance to visit Google in October 2010, and they had a fleet of, we couldn't see them of course, but they have a fleet of 12 robotic road vehicles, and they've gone, at that point, 2010, 200,000 miles with one accident. They stopped at a stop sign and someone ran into them from behind. I think that's all. There are offline stations. This facilitates nonstop travel, and also this helps a lot with if you're in a very dense area, you can have a number of stations, and because the stations are offline, it doesn't decrease capacity of the system, and it in fact increases accessibility. Also, the development potential of offline stations is very large. In the Twin Cities, we're building a 12-mile train line, and the development potential, they say, of that 12-mile, it's $1 billion. That 12-mile billion-dollar line is a $6 billion economic return on investment. $1 investment, $6 return. That is in buildings near the stations, and also the economic draw of national and global businesses to headquarter in the Twin Cities. The network configuration is another key to developing this system. It's something new, but it seems outrageous to me that this is new. If you build a line haul system and there's an accident, you're stuck. If you build a network configuration, you think of like a highway network in a big city. If this line is stuck, an accident or whatever, at capacity, then you just go over to the next line. And so in this sense, developing capacity is a different kind of ballgame with a network configuration because all the lines are open for all vehicles all the time. There's energy efficient vehicles and no point source emissions. We're thinking of having this solar powered, but it can be powered using energy from the grid. There's a system that I'll show you in Sweden, Uppsala, Sweden, and that system has linear induction motors in the track, and that is just housed, that just powers using the power from the city. User-controlled destinations, this works with the offline stations and also personal vehicles. You have many stations, not close together, but at significant districts or significant locations, the grocery store, the hospital, the school, the downtown. And the user then gets in the car when they want and goes to whichever destination they want to, using the computer-controlled system to tell them where they're going. It's on demand. The stations have cars at them all the time waiting for patrons to come and get in that first car. Therefore, it's available 24/7 every day. So this is kind of what it looks like. This is a rendering. The pylons are roughly every 90 feet, and the station or the guideway is probably second floor. There can be a little bit of grade fluctuation, and then you can also house your light infrastructure, your power infrastructure, your cell phone. I don't know if cell phones don't have wires, but any kind of wiring can be housed in the track as well. So I did kind of talk about offline stations. Dr. Anderson is from St. Paul or Minneapolis. He says that offline stations are the key breakthrough, because if a car doesn't have to stop, then the average speed and the high speed are roughly the same. A car starts out at the station, accelerates out of the station, goes at that average top speed until they slow down and get into the station for where the user is going to depart. So this is nonstop trips, no waiting at stoplight, stop sign, looking for children. The highest average speed, as I said. This also leads for high throughput. If you get on a bus and at a bus stop, you slow down the speed of the system. Vehicles run only on demand. The vehicles are waiting at the station. You ride with chosen companions or alone, as I've said. Service is always available. Wait time is very little. Adding stations does not reduce the average speed, as I said, and stations can be sized to demand. This is an example of throughput. This highway has a capacity of 6,000 cars an hour. Let me talk about one other thing here. The average speed, the highest speed, The speed for maximum capacity on a highway is about 48 miles an hour. If you go any faster than that, then the spacing between the vehicles lengthens and the capacity goes down. So this is an actual highway at capacity. Take the vehicles out, put the people in the middle, and add a pod car. So the first system that was built in this country was in Morgantown, West Virginia. It's been running every day since 1975. That's longer than I've been alive. Of course, you probably knew that. Thank you for laughing. That's nice of you. It runs at 15-second headway, 30 miles an hour to the top speed. The length of this system is approximately 9 miles. It's a campus connector, and so it connects the Evandale campus, kind of like up in the hill, to the downtown campus. Takes about 11.5 minutes to travel the entire length. The intermediate stations are bypassed. This is group rapid transit, however. The vehicles hold about 20 people. They got 92 in them in the PRT cram, right?
It's college, what do you want?
It's college, yeah.
It's like a VW Bug, yeah.
They stopped at 92, I can't believe it.
Someone's trying to get more.
Well, there's a vodka in there too.
I think the one in India.
I've seen those traffic
numbers. You sit on the roof in it.
Yeah.
So this trip runs 15,000, or it holds 15, hold on, you guys got me all confused. 15,000 trips per school day, and there's about half of the days are school days, about 185. Capacity, theoretical capacity is 5,000 persons per hour per direction. Where did my note come from? I had notes. This thing has gone, well, let's go to the next slide, right? I think, when you were talking, I wrote down a bunch of notes.
Hope they were good ones.
Well, I skipped half of them already. This is available 98.5% of the time. I would challenge that your car is not even available 98.5% of the time. Transit LOSA, this is built in 1975. This is using 1975 technology, and it's available 98% of the time. PRT has traveled 22 million miles along its tracks, 140 million injury-free passenger miles. How's that for safety? All them road people, 0 deaths on the highway, 0 deaths on the PRT. It has 73 vehicles. They don't run all the time. 126 million capital costs. That's in 1975. 3.3 million operating costs per year. So if we go back to those 15,000 rides, and those are only school day rides, so you take 15,000 rides times 185 school days, and so that's how many riders for half the year. And then you charge them each $1.50, and that's 4.06 million. So the operating cost is 3.3 million. You could easily make, if you have it free for half the year, all the days that kids aren't in school, is you make revenue. How many highways make revenue, sir? Just kidding, I probably shouldn't poke fun at you. I don't know yet. Okay, oh, the other thing about Morgantown. Who's heard of Morgantown? Holy buckets! How come? Are y'all from there?
Mountaineers.
Not yet. Football.
Do you know how many permanent residents are in Morgantown? How many year-round residents? Yeah, less than 50,000. And so if a town that has less than 50,000 permanent residents can build and maintain a PRT longer than I've been alive, I think this is possible and probable anywhere. Morgantown did just pass 50,000 permanent residents, which is the bottom benchmark of federal funding, and so they're now looking at expanding the PRT and upgrading the control system, etc. Here are some videos of PRT at WVU that probably aren't going to work because the first one didn't. Masdar City, UAE is the first 21st century PRT. Masdar City is the first carbon neutral, zero waste to landfill, car-free city powered entirely by alternative energy sources. The UAE is the richest country per capita in terms of their oil. So if the richest oil country, the biggest exporting oil producing per capita in the world, is building an alternative energy city, what does that say about our oil future? I know we live in Alaska, but still. The ATN is built underground in the undercroft of the city. It has 5 stations, 2 for passengers, 3 for freight. This is built at the Institute of Technology, their world-leading Institute of Technology. So it's just, right now, the 2 stations, right? It's just a people mover back and forth. But the 3 stations for freight move the freight, the waste, the recycling, all of that around the city. The ATN has 13 vehicles, 8 for normal people, 2 for VIPs, 3 for freight. The network is 3/4 of a mile long. It's been ridden on more than 500,000 times. Heathrow Airport in London, this is probably my favorite system. It opened a couple of years ago. There's 21 vehicles and 3 stations. This connects Terminal 5, which is their new innovative terminal at Heathrow Airport. And there's 2 stations in the remote parking lot. This currently serves 800 passengers a day, eliminates 50,000 shuttle bus journeys per year, and more than 500,000 trips have been taken. This parking lot, this remote parking lot, they charged a rate when there was a bus system going around, and then they actually raised the price of this parking lot when the PRT opened at Heathrow, and more cars started parking at this parking lot. So they raised the rate again, and more cars were coming because they wanted to ride the PRT. Today, they raised the rate a second time, and at some busy days, there's lines to enter this parking lot because it's full, right? But people want to take the PRT. So the popularity of this is very big. And Heathrow Airport just announced their plans, or they're going to start planning for expanding this system at Heathrow Airport. Heathrow is the world's third busiest airport. The pods use 70% less energy than it takes to power a car, 50% than a bus. This is per capita. It's 3.8 kilometers of guideway, 30 million, what's that L mean? Euros? No. Pounds, thank you. This is about 20 million a mile in US dollars to build. So that $1 billion 12-mile train line that I was telling you about in the Twin Cities, that's going to generate $6 billion of investment. That cost us $60 million a mile. And this system is 20 million a mile. And you can put stations more frequently to increase the economic potential for station design. Vectis. Vectis is owned by a Swedish company called Pasco. And Pasco is a steel manufacturer out of South Korea. Did I guess with that? Anyway, Vectis is a PRT system. It's a test track in Uppsala, Sweden. I know I'm kind of like watching the clock. Ascension Bay, South Korea. It's a coastal wetlands in South Korea. They're building this to 5 kilometer, 40 vehicles. It's in the middle of a wetland. So it took them, it was supposed to open this spring, but it's going to open, scheduling opening in the fall because this wetland, they didn't know how difficult it would be to put the pylons into the wetland. It's also an area of high typhoon activity and very active seismic activity. So to get this to be a safe system all the time, it took them a little bit more engineering than they were anticipating. So what about in the USA, right? Morgantown, 1975. The federal governments of Sweden and America signed a memorandum of cooperation in 2010, working on 4 things: high-speed rail, PRT, passenger safety, and transit-oriented development. So as a part of the PRT arm of this memorandum, there was a joint workshop held at the end of November 2011. And so out of this work, the Institute of Sustainable Transportation was born, a couple of other things as well, but the next big thing that's happening with the US DOT, partnering with the Swedish DOT, a number of other nonprofits regarding sustainability, renewable energy and transportation, having a PodCar conference, innovations in public transportation, the end of October in Washington, D.C. If you want more information, there are some websites there. I do have some flyers. If you want to go, I can help you get there. And then let's turn it over to Ryan to talk a little bit about Anchorage specifically.
Well, I just wanted to point out, I made this map here of what, I just used my intuition and standard, just ballpark, rule of thumb, because they're typically made of loops. And this is what a downtown feeder network would look like. It would feed in, and then of course it would feed in with the bus. If you want to take a look at that. And and I talked to how to. I know a bit about how to accomplish this realistically and politically. Well, you can talk with me after if you want to know about that. The AEDC guys gave a lot of good advice on how to go about it.
The one thing that you reminded me, if I can, one more thing, is that. But we talked a little bit earlier today about your long-range transportation plan regarding rail. You know, PRT doesn't get built unless it's in the transit plans. And so I think, 30, 20, 10 years out, this could be something to really look at. And the federal government, for the first time since the 70s, is spending real money researching PRT. And so I think that if it's going to go anywhere, a transportation, an MPO is a great place to start the ball rolling. And there will be federal funds available in the next MAP transportation bill. So, any questions?
Can we get a copy of your presentation?
It's on the computer. I don't know how to do that.
This doesn't do it as an iPhone.
I'll get it to you. Are there any MPOs at the forefront of thinking about PRT or PRT now that you come to mind?
San Jose just completed in the fall a 2-year, $4 million PRT study connecting their airport to the transportation hub and their local light rail. And they said, it needs more research. So that's how the federal's getting on board and looking at this, and R&D, that's what they say it needs. However, there are systems that have, but the federal government is hosting this conference to hopefully get more support and more backing from cities and from interested parties. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, is there any other informational reports for the order? Hearing none, then we are adjourned. This board meeting.